Sandstorm.
We are so excited about the ability to create our own organizations, our own governments, to opt out of the status quo and build our own communities. We have been working on a project called Giveth, which is trying to decentralize charity. I would say it's a front for the revolution, honestly. I'm just going to throw that out there. We are very excited to allow people to use open source code to create their own organizations for nonprofit means. Our code has actually been used for a lot of for-profit things because that's how open source code goes. But our focus is on building communities around causes, any cause. I'm Griff Green, Santa. Sorry, I'm Santa. And I've been trying to lead this project. Actually, it really started last year at the Burn. I gave a talk at Center Camp that basically describes the project anyway, before it even existed. And this is my best buddy, Jordi Baylina, who is a major part of the Catalonian revolution that we have going on in Spain. Barcelona has a vote in October 1st for independence. So. I don't know. I don't think that's popular in the news media or anything, but it's pretty cool. Jordi, you want to say anything about yourself?
Well, no, that's has been working for 300 years right now. It's a revolution that took 300 years, but now we are very close to make it. So it's very interesting. It's a very interesting moment right now that we're living in Catalonia right now.
He's also the white hat hacker for everything in Ethereum. He's saved hundreds of millions of dollars multiple times for, of course with a team of people, but this guy is the core, right? The Michael Jordan. So he's a really, really incredible human being. I can't say enough. But we want to go back to the revolution. Oh, and by the way, this is a conversation. Feel free to interrupt. We have microphones, and if you guys want to talk, please just, sadly, I have to do the whole raise your hand thing like it's kindergarten or something, but that's just so we can get you a microphone. Feel free to interrupt us, right? But I want to start by looking at current organizations and current revolutions that we're already building, right? We have so many technological revolutions right now, and actually, I don't know what I'm going to say. I'm so sorry, guys. But these revolutions have to fight against the status quo, and it's really hard. It's really hard to just start something fresh with just a couple friends or even a large community and organize yourselves when you have an incumbent organization that doesn't want you there. And what's really nice about blockchain technology is it allows you to come to consensus in a decentralized fashion. With Giveth, what we're trying to do is allow people to create organizations on their own and connect the people who have the funds that want to see a change in the world to the people who have the time and the plan to make that change a reality, and connect them directly. Currently in our charitable world, we have these organizations that sit in the middle. If you want to end world hunger, you have, the Feed the Children charity, and you send money to them, but you don't really know where it's going or who's using it or what they're doing with it. We think that's silly, and we think it'd be easy enough to actually connect the people who are sending the money directly to the people who are using the money, so they can share ideas and they can really work together to build the future that they want to see. This could be used for anything. We're focused on charity because that's a safe place to be, right? It's really easy. Before, we were both very involved in the DAO, which had investors and was very complicated. The SEC just wrote a thing about it, so we don't want that trouble. It's a lot easier to work on nonprofit organizations that just want to change the world. And with this technology, we can create a way for people to interact with each other in decentralized fashion, and they don't even know each other. So, I don't know, maybe I should let Jordi talk for a little bit.
Yeah, just maybe from probably a little bit more technical part, but we can start what really is an organization and what's the goal of an organization. And you will see that at the end, an organization, what it does is take decisions. But take decisions, it takes decisions by its own, as a single person, as a single entity. So when the organization decides to do something, it does the organization. It's not as an individual or not individual, it does the organization. Okay, so what we are talking when we are saying that we are creating new kind of organizations, mainly what we are doing is we are creating new models, new governance systems in order to take these decisions as a whole. Okay, so this is mainly the main purpose, and here is where blockchain comes to. Before that, we needed a system, or we needed maybe a legal entity, or some system to enforce that. Okay, but with a blockchain technology, blockchain technology is there, so we can use this technology just to trust each other, to create organizations across the globe, to create organizations where anybody can participate in that organization, and what's more important, a well-defined governance system can be defined in this organization, and decisions can be taken as a whole. So, for example, a charity organization can decide, for example, to make a specific, specific action in some country that will take some money, some milestone with a specific thing. Then the organization needs to decide to go and do it. Okay. Of course, there is the other part. That's how you control that the funds are really spent, how you manage the organization. But the first step is how decisions are taken from an organization as a whole. Okay, and this is what mainly blockchain technology enables very from scratch, very easily. Okay.
Question.
So this mic, everyone, there's an on-off switch, and it has a middle and an on. Flip it all the way up, but then turn it off when you're done talking so we don't have feedback.
Yeah, I'm curious if how big you can scale that system in where like all the organisms are, contributing to the decision, and there's not a representative entity of those organisms. How big can be a government?
Here, for scaling, I'm going to talk about two different kind of limitations on the scaling. First one is a technological one. Of course, blockchain technology right now is in a very early stage. There is a lot of very smart people that's working for scaling that. There are very new proposals that they are coming, but this is the cute of the edge in the technology. Okay, so right now you can create organizations. For example, the DAO had about 22,000 token holders, or at least address. We don't know exactly if they were persons or just a person could have a lot of addresses, but that can give you a good number for that. Okay, so it's a big one, but it's a very small one if you compare within a state, for example. Okay, and the other limitation is that. This is it's more a social, any organization, how you scale a governance system. And this is not for developers or for technical guys. It's more for social people. The social, the social experts should give a lot of ideas. The technology is just there to create the governance system. But what exactly is the governance system? You do not expect that developers we create good governance systems. We are not expert on that, and the humanity has a lot of experiences and a lot of expertise that needs to be taken and implemented these rules in the blockchain in order to create the best governance systems for this. And there are a lot of governance, a lot of ideas that have been talking, that a lot of that people have talked and that try it in maybe in some context, that now the technology enables and can be used and extended because of this technology. So here is very much a call for sociologists. So I don't know, it's the name. Sociologists, people, and people that has experience in humanistic people that has experience in governance, in human relations, and all that stuff that needs to add to this technology. Needs to be put over this technology to build and to create these new kind of organizations that we are going to see in the coming time.
Revolution one. So I love talking about the larger concept of kind of how this is going to create kind of a societal reformation. That's kind of what I call it. Or a revolution is one way we typically think of a revolution as like, oh, we're going to overthrow something and then install some other system. The first, do you know what does everyone here know what a blockchain is? Like we kind of went over it a little bit. No, okay. So a blockchain is a public ledger. Mostly, there's some private blockchains, but public ledger that's permanent, that we can write to, but no one can go back and erase. Okay, so we can all share this ledger in society, and we can write to it whatever we want to, whether it's the first application of this blockchain underlying public ledger was a currency, a unit of account that we could trade from on a peer-to-peer basis without any central intermediary either printing it or blessing it that it's valid. So there's no bank that's hosting the ledger, and there's no Federal Reserve that's saying this is the only money that we want to do. That's done by a distributed network that allows for incentive structures to be created that allow everyone to participate, but no one to have total control of that system. And if they do have total control, they can write what the ledger says, then the system's worthless, because then that person writes what they just give themselves all the tokens, right? And so that first application of the blockchain was a currency. Now there's many, many, many more things that we can do with a public ledger that everyone can write to. As we've mentioned before, we can have reputation systems. We can register our house or our title information on top of there. We could register, a lot of finances things. Voting, I think it's kind of silly that in 2017 that we have pieces of paper that we write down, whether it's an R or a D or an L or whatever the hell you want to do, that we actually have people counting them physically. We had no way of doing that so with a blockchain we have a public ledger that we don't have to have someone to trust to count those things, and we can do that in a anonymous or pseudonymous way. So we can now do governance and voting in those senses. When I say it's a societal reformation, I mean that every aspect of society is going to be touched by allowing us to interact with each other in a trust-free or trustless is a word that a lot of people use in this system, which is a bad word in my opinion, because it means that we don't trust it, trustless. But they mean that no trust is required. We're trusting math instead of we're trusting human fallibility. And so when we build on top of these systems, they're resilient. There's no central point of failure. They're public. They're adaptable. There's very easy exits. And so whatever types of systems we build on, we had the religious Reformation with the printing press, and that went from the church basically saying, this is what God says, do it, but you can't interpret anything for yourself. Then we had the printing press, we had Martin Luther, and now no one interprets your spirituality for you, right? We had a separation of state and of church and your spirituality. Now we're having a separation of the provider for money was the state, mostly, because they said, we're going to provide the money and you're not allowed to compete. And so now we have a separation of state and money. We're going to say, okay, the people can now create their own types of currencies. We don't know which ones are going to be the best. And that's just the first app. The people can create their own governance structures. The people can create their own distributed autonomous, so decentralized autonomous organizations or DAOs that eliminate the need for those hierarchical controls that we normally have, those top-down methods of of infrastructure, which can be easily corrupted. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But if you don't have the power to go back and erase, one of the famous lines that Paul Snow said of Factum, they were talking about doing decentralized property registries in Honduras, and he said, okay, look, we can write once and never erase, and the corrupt people, they say, well, I don't know what lie I'm going to tell tomorrow today, which is kind of a weird way of saying it, but if I'm going to give someone else that house on the registry, I better know who I'm going to give it to in 6 months when I want to be corrupt right now. Otherwise, there's going to be a record of my corruption. I'm going to be able to write it. And so that's going to take time for those, for them to honor it. Maybe the court system doesn't care. Maybe the court system's corrupt too. And there are decentralized justice systems coming out. Crowd jury is another one out of, Federico asked out of Argentina, is creating an online-based restorative justice system, specifically for mostly online jurisdictions. But when we say online jurisdictions, with these blockchain-based governance and rules, we don't have jurisdictions that end at some arbitrary geographical boundary in the sand, or the Rio Grande or whatever. We have online jurisdictions. So these large centralized institutions that basically got their power by invading as much as they possibly can until they met enough resistance that they said, okay, well, we'll draw along here. You can have that. These are the lines that we draw. And so the Westphalian model for nation states is going to go away. We're not going to have nation states moving forward. We're going to have governance structures. We're going to be able to opt in to rules that govern our society. But they're not governance structures that are top down by a very non-compliant, non-adaptive structure that was written by the best minds in the world 200-300 years ago. At the time, it was the best. So think of those online rules and jurisdictions as opt-in, and think of them as adaptable. And you will know that, and I'll answer a question here in a second, but you'll know that this has kind of taken place or won when you'd rather go to the Camp Decentral embassy than the United States embassy. When you can go register the online embassy that protects your sovereignty and will go to bat for you in the world governance organizations. Right now, United States embassy is pretty powerful, right? But when you'd rather go, I'm going to the Camp Decentral one. That's better. They got their shit together. That's the one that you'll know that this has kind of achieved its goal, which is to eliminate those central and allow you to opt in to whatever framework and you want to, and build whatever type of society you want. So I'm Matt, by the way. I didn't introduce myself, but I'll answer questions too.
Yes. Yeah, you said blockchains. They're a public ledger that you can add to, but you cannot erase from. How does that work? Like how do you, like, anyone involved with the block or the smart contract? What do you call it?
The blockchain. The blockchain is the accounting ledger. Just think of it as a public, permanent accounting ledger.
So why can't you remove an erase from it?
So I'll give that to the technical people. I can explain it, but here.
Yeah, it's just when you have one information, what you are doing is your first step is you broadcast that information. So mainly you are connecting to your neighbors, okay? You send this information to your neighbors send to the other neighbors and the neighbors, so it's spread to all over the network, okay? This is the first step, is the broadcasting of the information. The second step is the consensus part. So all the people with these protocols, with the blockchain, what it does is all these computers across the network, they reach a consensus to put this information, to sort these informations, and to put all this information in a single block. And you are creating a block, but depending on the blockchain, but for example in Ethereum it's once every 15 seconds. So once every 15 seconds a block is created where a lot of information is put from people around the globe, okay? And this is set. This is a consensus. Everybody agrees that this is the information that's set and it's fixed. And this block is becoming the fixed block, is the block number 124674. So the number whatever. And this block is there forever. While there is a single computer in the network and there is thousands and thousands across the network that has that's turned on, and that has information, this block is gonna be there, and it's gonna be public, and everybody will be able to access that block. That's more or less how it works.
Let me just add that there's an economic consensus, there's an economic incentive for independent people to record that data in a million different places, right? So all over the world, there's people that are basically paid to store this data, but because of the way it's hashed, no one can ever go back and change it, because everyone has the truth in a decentralized way, and so that truth is shared, and it can't be changed. It can only be added to. Does that answer?
I think so. What I understand is you put it out there, and then it spreads into the whole network. So if anyone tries to edit one thing, it's still recorded in all the rest of the network.
Yeah, the other people wouldn't allow it to be changed.
There's one version of the history of the entire ledger, and everyone keeps a copy of that, and they all have to come to a consensus about what the version of the history is. And then before the next one goes on. And the further back in the history, the more mathematical power you have to keep that. You would have to have more power than the whole network to rewrite those things. Which would, if you did, the network becomes useless because you control it.
And how did people reach consensus?
How do people reach consensus? Oh, well, this is quite complex. This is a quite complex protocol. It's called proof of work. There are other that are proof of stake, but depends. But I'm going to explain maybe the proof of stake because I think it's much more easy to understand. Okay, imagine that there are 100 computers in the system that are like the masters. Okay. And then there is a kind of elections. So when 51% of these 100 computers decides that they vote and they decide that this is the right block, then they agree that that's the right block, and the other must follow. Okay, can be a kind of democratic system. Okay, but the thing is, how in this proof of stake, the problem is how you become one of these 100 because everybody can access to that, and then there is a kind of elections and then a kind of proof of stake. Okay, proof of work is another system that's more complex to explain, but the idea is it's a kind of lottery. Okay, so everybody is just creating these blocks, everybody is just doing the job, and the other ones, and they propose one. And the one that has they just do a big calculus, and the one that has it's in look and has a very short number, just because he calculates, he spent a lot of energy just calculating the stuff. This the best one is the one that's taken, and the other, but the most important part is that the rest of the one verify that that block is good, it's okay, and they accept that that's okay. So they reach and they say that this block is fixed, and they start mining, they start creating the next block. Okay, but it's a kind of economical incentive.
Sorry, to put in context, how many times a day something like
Microphone, please. There's one here.
To put it in context, some consensus, like how long does it take and how many times a day, for example, just to put it in like in a framework that we all understand.
It just depends on the blockchain. In Ethereum, it's every 15 seconds. In Bitcoin, it's every 10 minutes. And these are all probabilistic. So it's like there's a probability that every 10 minutes somebody will find a Bitcoin block. It's just like there's a probability once every 30 whatever times the roulette wheel will land on 00, right? So, but it just depends. It depends on the developers that wrote the code, how often they want it. But he's had a question for a long time.
Yeah, I know a lot about Bitcoin. I've been studying it for like 2-3 years. But things haven't really grounded other than sending tons of money from China to the US in a non-traceable way. That's the only specific thing that I've seen be very useful to an everyday application. Can you guys name like how Bitcoin or Ethereum or cryptocurrency, other than changing the paradigm of how you think about the world, affected your individual life on insurance, relationships, the top things that we come into like contact with every day. Love this. Yeah, like how can Bitcoin or cryptocurrency change my life now?
Honestly, we're still young. There aren't that many things to do, right? Well, Matt, do you want to dive in?
I was gonna say. Right now, Bitcoin's not for you. Sorry, it's not for you.
you have Bitcoin in just the value transfer mechanism. You have a credit card, I assume, a piece of plastic in your pocket that you can swipe and buy whatever you want whenever you want. You have currency that everyone else in the world wants more of, and you're probably not clipping coupons, right? You're not doing that. So right now, Bitcoin is really not for you. We're building on top of it. We're sending lots of money. Bitcoin is for the 3 to 4 billion people on the planet that don't have any banking services at all, and that can't trust the institutions around them to do their money because they're corrupt. So with a smartphone or a dumb phone, a lot what you can do with text messages, you can now be your own bank. So if you are just now getting internet, or you've had internet in the world in places like Africa and Asia and South America, people are, they may not have running water. They have a smartphone, right? So you can now, with some other different types of application layers, you can now be your own bank. You can do your own funding, and you can access, in a lot of cases, you'll be able to access the same types of financial instruments eventually that the people at Wall Street can. So in that way, it over the course of a long period of time, maybe 10 years, 10 years, just like the internet in 1995, 94, it really didn't affect that many people's lives other than in Silicon Valley and some tech hubs. But look 10, 15 years later, and it democratized all of information. We now have the hub of information. This is the internet of money. This is the protocol layer on the internet that allows everyone to transmit value without central institutions. And so right now it's not for you. I mean, it will definitely fundamentally change, but we have established institutions in the Western world that we're very privileged to have, that are very expensive middlemen, but that allow us to trade whenever we want and go wherever we want. And the rest of the world doesn't have that.
Yeah, there are a lot of cool projects that people are working on. Like we're bringing transparency and accountability to charities, so that you can see exactly where your money goes and interact with the people. There's also a lot of governance development around stuff like liquid democracy, if anyone's ever heard of that, where you could actually tokenize your vote, and you can have, it's kind of like a mix between representative democracy and direct democracy, where you can actually send your voting token to 10 different people, split it up in a different percentage, and they could send it to other people and send it to other people, and they could be your representative for that day. You click a button, you get it all, and then you can vote for that topic that you want. And people are using that, but they're not using blockchain to do it yet. Because it takes time to develop this stuff, but they are doing it. There's a Flux party in Australia that's making major moves, and I think there's people in San Francisco pushing it, and different other places where they're actually using that to hack the system that's in place, where they will try to elect a party member who just follows the liquid democracy he sees on his phone and votes according to that, right? So you can have your different delegates. There's so many projects that are being developed to decentralize so many cool things. One thing is decentralized web browsing, like this man right here, Fabian, who has been working on a lot of the core Ethereum protocol. Like if you're using command line stuff, he wrote that language, I mean, it's pretty incredible. And he also is working on Mist, which is decentralizing web browsing, which I would love to know more about, actually. But what do you think? How will decentralized web browsing help his life or affect his life?
Yeah, how would it, I mean, let's say not, okay, yeah, I have to first get into it, yeah? Takes a few seconds, so. So I would say, first let's explain what decentralized, or what the decentralized browser is, Mist. Mist is the browser which comes from the Ethereum Foundation, and this is a browser which doesn't allow you, or it also allows you, but it is not meant to allow you to browse the old web, right? The old web is the server-client infrastructure. So you have a server, you request the server, you get the payload, you execute the payload, and you have to always basically have to trust third entities to get certain data, as well as it's not very scalable, right? So for example, if you have one website which is requested a lot, this means there's a bottleneck, right? They have to add servers to make it actually handle thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. In a distributed system, you don't have that problem, because everybody is in a peer-to-peer network connected, and the load is already distributed by default. So what the Mist browser does is, it allows you to run decentralized applications, fully decentralized applications. And the idea is that the data you're downloading your application from is not from a single server, but it's from a peer-to-peer distributed network. It's called Swarm, or it could also be IPFS, but currently it is Swarm. Swarm is basically peer-to-peer file storage, kind of like BitTorrent, but in a more automated fashion. So you can just upload your files to Swarm, and then you download them, and you get a reference hash. This is the digital fingerprint of that file, of that file, and you can basically distribute that hash around, and other people, by knowing that hash, can access these files. Again, they just ask the network, hey, give me the chunks which belong to this file, and you download all the pieces back together. You compare that it's actually correct, that the data you got is correct and is the right file, so there's like no altering, no man-in-the-middle attack possible. And in the Ethereum decentralized browser Mist, the application you download would be, for example, right now a JavaScript application, right? It's a single-page app. It's like most of web applications, or the more and more becoming web applications are single-page applications. This means they're applications which have all their logic in JavaScript, basically in the front end. Or either you download the whole logic, or you download parts of the logic, and you execute them basically directly in your front end, and you only, most of these applications only ping an API. They only ping like an external server to get only the raw data, rather than the whole, how the interface looks like. I mean, if you remember in the past, you click on a website and it always reloads the whole website, right? And it takes time and so on and so on. Today, most of the time, you click on websites and things switch immediately. And this is because the logic of the interface itself is already in your computer, and it's executing. And it's only downloading the actual raw data it needs. So in the Mist browser, you only can use single-page applications. So what you would do is you distribute your application on Swarm. You would download it basically by accessing this hash. This can also come through a decentralized naming service like ENS. I can talk about it a little bit later. What would happen here is that you download the application, and the application sits in your computer, and it would only talk to the Ethereum blockchain as the backend logic. So these applications only use smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain for executing their logic, right? And this also means that in the current architecture, there's only certain applications possible, and also only certain applications useful, right? Because in a blockchain system, you can do certain things you cannot do in the old web. But you can also not do certain things you can do in the current web, right? For example, having certain things of scale, especially like big data analysis and so on, you cannot do on the blockchain right now. It would make no sense. But if you want to distribute ownership, control ownership, or have a way to have groups participate with each other through all kind of means, tokens, ownership, reputation, whatnot, then you can do that. You can build these kind of applications. And you could not build them on the internet without always having a central trusted party. And that's kind of what the decentralized web dissolves. It dissolves the centralized trusted party necessity. So, I mean, in the complete picture, you have basically a decentralized file storage. You have the decentralized backend logic. Basically, in this case, trust in the Ethereum blockchain and all its smart contract logic. And you have also other protocols like the Whisper protocol, which allows you to communicate in real time between applications in some kind of broadcasting fashion. That probably sounds all very technical, I guess.
I have a really quick question.
This question, the importance of the DApp, okay? You, as a developer, you can create an application that it's there. You don't need any server, you don't need anybody to run it. So from the open source community, this is very, very important. Right now, if you create a program as an open source, okay, you create the program, but you will need some platform. You will need somebody to run that application for you. Okay. When you create a DApp, you can set the DApp. You can put the DApp in the IPFS, you know, in the community, in those servers, and the DApp is running there. You cannot even stop. The people can use it, and that's the important part. So it's like a next step. It's very important, especially from the open source community, because it's the open source deployment. It's the open source usability that gives the DApp. That's why it's so important, this technology, and that's why it's so important Mist.
DApp is decentralized application.
Yeah. we used a dApp for our camp for Decentral. Everyone had to send in their dues in Ether to a smart contract. We have a user interface. They go online. They have to use Mist or MetaMask or some kind of decentralized web browsing tool, and they can the money is stuck there. And as the camp leader, I can't get money out unless I show receipts and show what I'm sending it for. So we have complete transparency. And then when we're done with all the expenses, everyone can go back onto the dApp, click a button, and it doesn't matter if they're in China behind the firewall or anything. Everyone in the world has access to this. And if they have the right key for the ones that sent money in, they can click a button and get their refund from the money that wasn't spent. Complete transparency. I would say that's probably the closest thing that is affecting us right now. I've heard of corrupt camps and stuff like that, and that can't happen with this application.
Yeah, I was a little confused with the concept of a decentralized browser. I thought that it was consuming like the website assets, for example. But you're saying it's just like Swamp can just like have the decentralized whatever system running, and then you consume the data from that decentralized to other stuff. That is not maybe assets and things like this.
So there are many ways of how you can create these kind of like infrastructures. Obviously, Mist uses a lot of protocols. So again, it uses Swarm, it uses the Ethereum blockchain, it uses Whisper to make that browser experience possible. There are also other browsers who try to do it different. There is even a browser where you basically upload your files. You have your website on your computer, and when you have your website, your computer running, others can access your website. It's kind of like everybody creates his own little server and so on. I mean, there are many ways of how you could do it. It's not necessarily the same, but
in that case, if you have to wait like 15 minutes for a consensus, then you cannot have like real-time.
15 seconds.
15 seconds.
But it doesn't really. So the consensus is about knowing if something basically went through and is confirmed, right? For just watching things, you don't wait 15 seconds. So you can read the blockchain at all time, and you can read it in real-time speed. Because you actually, if you have the full node synchronized, you have all the data on your computer already. You have all smart contracts and all their state of each smart contract on your computer, and you can simply executing them by running them locally in your node. If you want to send a transaction, if you want to make a change in a smart contract and so on, then you would send the transaction into the network. And once this transaction is actually mined and made part of the blockchain, then the state is altered, and then it's actually the new state for everybody else visible. So the other party, the other end, would have to wait 15 seconds and a bit more, because most of the time you would not only wait for one block, but you would wait for a few blocks to be sure that it's actually in, because there is a probability that this transaction actually went through this way, right?
15,
These are the last two questions.
15 seconds. I know it's much more less than 15 minutes, but sometimes it's a lot. Waiting, depending what you want to do, 15 seconds is a lot. But one way to scale, and I want to point that because this is interesting. Sometimes you can do things off chain. So I can the same, and you can understand sometimes the blockchain as the code. Okay, so I can make a contract with you. I can work with you, and we can do it on hand, but we go only to the court, we go only to the blockchain in this case, in the case that we don't agree, when there is some information. So there are a lot of a lot of family and a lot of research that goes in that direction. This is what's called state channels, payment channels, and all that stuff. But it's interesting to point that, and this will speed up a lot also these timings that we are creating.
Yeah, maybe to say it non-technical. So the blockchain is the technology running behind these kind of decentralized systems, and it's just the first of the architectures and technologies we use. There will probably be a lot more coming. Second, it doesn't necessarily matter right now how it works specifically, and if it's 10 minutes block time or 15 or no block time in the future or whatever. This is all architecture, right? Like if you once have figured out how you can solve a certain problem, then it's only about time to improve that and optimize that on the end it will be in the future as real time and feel like real time. So this is just a matter of time, and there's a lot of like, I mean, every time we have these kind of discussions and so on the end we end up always explaining the tech, which is necessary because it's a new concept and you need to kind of understand it, to really get also the concepts around it and what is possible and what does it make what makes it possible. But at the same time, the technology itself doesn't really matter so much, right? Like you today, you go into a car and you drive the car. Do you care how the engine looks in detail, or do you care like if it's this or this cylinder or whatever? Maybe if you're a fanatic or you're like really into cars, you might, right? But normally you just like press gas and the thing drives. And that's the same with blockchain. It will be like the technology will be disappearing in the background. We will understand these new concepts, that these things are possible, that you can have a state machine, you can have like a computer in the cloud which is not controlled. It's not an Amazon cloud server or a Google cloud server, or it's not like one entity. It's a somehow distributed in the virtual cloud computer which just works, and it works all the time, and you can just interact with it. And that's kind of like the concept which has to sink in. And through that, new concepts and new possibilities come along, and like actually all of these decentralization and all of these new projects popping up, we're just scratching the surface. We're just figuring out what can be done today. And like, for example, one of the current hype things are ICOs. I'm not sure if you already talked about that or if this is interesting at all. It's probably interesting, but if it's...
No, we don't need to talk about it. Yeah, we're trying to stay away from too much money stuff. In fact,
yeah.
we don't have too much time, so I want to go.
Yeah, okay, sure.
But coming up with metaphors is hard
when there's the technical understanding, and then there's trying to relate that to the real world. So we know what a public accounting ledger is. We call a blockchain a public accounting ledger that's permanent. That's a really plain language of saying it can't be edited unless you're...
Right there, and then we're done.
Hi. So these incentives like proof of stake and proof of work. I know proof of work is very technical, and it's kind of rewarding like people like these big like mining rigs in China or mining farms. Is there a possibility to engineer a reward that would really benefit the consumer? I guess, I mean, maybe it's silly, but in the same way that credit cards do cash back or like airline miles, is there something that's very consumer friendly and kind of mindless that will incentivize the everyday consumer to just hop on to using different cryptocurrencies, or is that worth doing? Or
I mean, I would say that a blockchain as it is right now, so yeah, we have these different algorithms. They're already incentivizing people, right? So because, you know, if you have a limited system or a system with a limited amount of units, it's scarce, so it might just grow in value. So the incentive for you to join using Ethereum or Bitcoin is not only the technology and the things you can do with it, but also that it is a in value increasing system by design, right? I'm pretty sure there will be a lot of different consensus algorithm coming out in the future. So we're using proof of work in most of the blockchain right now because it's the most secure, it's the most used one, it's the one we figured out how it works and that it works securely. Right now, kind of more research is proof of stake. It works a bit different. It doesn't work with having hashing power. It works with putting money at stake, which is kind of like the consumer thing you could do. I'm pretty sure there will be a lot of more consensus algorithms coming out in the future, and it may be a completely different way of how to solve that. Maybe it's not even a consensus algorithm in the sense we know it today. But yeah, I don't know any which is kind of like a rewarding system. Though you have a lot of systems running on top of the Ethereum blockchain today, where you have a custom token for a application, and there is an incentive for you to join that system early on, or join it because there is a reward out of the token, or there is some kind of functionality you get from it you otherwise don't get, and so on and so on. So yeah, there are already things like this going this direction.
Even like
a lot actually.
Bonuses or memberships or discounts.
Yeah.
You can use those tokens for those.
Our good friend here from the crowd, Alex Sturkey, actually is working with a decentralized organization that started with proof of stake and switched back to proof of work, which is interesting. So I thought he could say something on this.
Yeah, like being able to distribute and be like permissionless, like anyone can come and bring their own resources to the network. Was a really important reason for switching, because with like proof of stake, anyone can come with some computer components to participate in the network and earn. There's always ways that you can, I guess, be rewarded in the system. Over time, I think we will transition back to proof of stake, but the proof of work element is really good for distributing and making sure that the currency has lots of value and it's an equal opportunity for everyone. Like anyone can plug in.
What is the project?
UBIC, yeah. There's a lot of different ways to say ubiquitous, so I guess it's to each of his own.
I think you had a question, right? So we need a mic over there.
Is there a maximum file size for the DApp?
For our DApp?
For technical reasons, I think it's 32 megabytes, but it should exist. So, I mean, that's a current alpha. I think there is one, but it has.
It's more a it's more a technological limitation that that a theoretical limit. Okay, it's like the technology is advancing. Every time it's going to be easy to create to put bigger files and that files go faster and get better distributed. But it will take time. Right now, the limitations in this system is the technological system. The protocols are not enough developed, and we are improving, and every time are better. If you compare the blockchain technology now and 3 years ago, it make a big change. It has nothing to do. And you probably, if you compare how it's now and how it's going to be in 1 year or 2 years, we're going to talk in a very different parameters for sure.
Okay, so your website looks like an HTML 1.0 website? I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, it's when you're talking about file size, right? So, I mean, I can make a very complicated website with a lot of files. And, I mean, none of these files have to go larger than 32 megabytes. But this is just right now a limitation. It's probably not even next week anymore a limitation. So, but yeah, you can make really complicated web applications already, but given the fact that you shouldn't, in the RD case, use an external remote server with like an old server client infrastructure, you probably would build something completely different anyway. So we are right now at the level where the most steps are rather simple. There may be 5-6 pages max with a few option screens, because keeping the logic of the smart contract symbol is key, because we're also just figuring out what works, how it works best, what is secure, and so on. If you really like blow up a huge smart contract with like 10 other smart contracts interlinked or whatever, the risk that you just have a hole somewhere which just drains all the money is very high. It happened in the case of the DAO, which lost $50 million.
I don't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, no, it's that's important. Simplicity, it's important for security. So when you create a lot of functionality, the security starts to decrease. So it's a balance, and you need to know what you are doing in that size. And of course, well, writing a smart contracts that holds money in there. If you have a bug in there, you have you don't have a second opportunity. You just lose the money. And we have seen that many times for the last years. So that's important thing.
And there's one very interesting thing is because money in blockchains inherently have money as well. We see that most of these projects, if they have money, we don't talk about $1,000 and $10,000, $100,000. We're talking about millions, multiple millions, and many ICOs even today they collect hundreds of millions of dollars. So it is pretty big amount of money in this kind of logic. And the thing is, it's very alpha. All of this is very alpha, and the risk is very high to participate. Most likely, also the reward is very high if you set on the right horse. But on the end, it is very alpha. The tools are just being developed, so there will be better tools in the future which make it a lot more safe to use, and there will be a lot better formal verification tools and analysis tools which make sure that your smart contract doesn't have any holes. But right now, it's pretty hard to say for certain for certain cases, especially for complex ones.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much. We have 2 next guest speakers. Might take like a 3-minute break. Yeah.
Just one more thing I wanted to mention in terms of potential impact on society. If you look at where governments derive their power from right now is basically the ability to create money. And if a government wants to have more money, they can either A, raise taxes, which pisses people off, They can borrow money from the future, which also gets people a little bit irate and is politically untenable sometimes. Or the third option is they can print money. And since only a tiny fraction of the populace understands inflation and where money comes from, they just see the cost of living increasing. That is kind of the stealth route to levy this tax on everyone and kind of enslave everybody. And that's how, I don't want to single out the US government, but that's how they're able to spend $500 billion every year on weapons and war that hardly anyone actually wants. And that's why Bitcoin is truly revolutionary, because no one can arbitrarily print as much as they want and gain this immeasurable power that no one really understands. Or like, no one's out in the street protesting this, but this is like this insane oppression of the entire world that this new technology is, I believe, the answer to. And that's why I think it's truly revolutionary and empowering and a completely new paradigm in building a new global society. But we have our next speaker, and I don't know much about you, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Thank you.
Sandstorm.